Thank you very much. The last time I was addressing a crowd this large in Glasgow was 3 weeks ago. I was at the Glasgow Concert Hall, standing alongside that great Liberal, George Galloway. The referendum brought some strange partnerships into being. Anyway, about halfway through my speech, two protesters were carried out shouting they were going to put a bullet in us. So I hope I get a better reception for this speech today. I wanted to start by saying thanks. Thanks to every single person in this room and across Scotland who gave their time, their toil, their vote to ensure that Scotland remained part of the United Kingdom. The issue at stake couldn't have been bigger. The campaign was at times raw and visceral. More people involved than ever before. It was a life-changing experience for me and for many others. A new generation of young voters was inspired. And by the way, we should be inspired to ensure that 16 and 17-year-olds have the vote in every election. There were some funny moments along the way. One afternoon my phone rang. It was the Labour MP, Jim Murphy. He said, "Danny, I need your help." I said, "What can I do, Jim?" He said, "Well, I'm in a taxi, and the driver's just said he'll turn the meter off if someone can explain the Barnett formula to him." But it was a serious issue, because we weren't just fighting for the United Kingdom, but for the liberal values that define us. The liberal belief that political argument should be won and lost on the basis of rational arguments, of facts, which is challenged by the contempt in which so much of politics is wrongly held at the moment. The liberal belief that all of us should have the freedom to speak our minds, and that bullying and intimidation simply have no place in a liberal democracy. And most importantly, the liberal belief that the entirety of human progress is defined by the removal of barriers between people, barriers of geography, of law, of prejudice, not the creation of new borders in the 21st century. These liberal values will be challenged again by UKIP and the Tory anti-Europeans. But for that argument that is to come, we should take confidence from the fact that in the end, the quiet majority of Scots spoke confidently and clearly and delivered the result for which we campaigned so hard. What a time. What a moment in history. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who shed more than a few tears when the result came in. And I want in particular to pay tribute to Willie Rennie and to Alistair Carmichael for the way they led our campaign. Willie was right to say that we Liberal Democrats understand and share the frustration, anger sometimes, that motivated so many of our fellow Scots to vote yes. And now we have to capture the energy and the emotion from both sides of the argument to do better for our country. Work is now in hand for the devolution of powers that has been part of our liberal worldview ever since Mr. Gladstone promised home rule all round. But it has come as a bit of a shock. It's come as a bit of a shock to the other two UK parties. Within hours of the result, some Conservatives were trying to score cheap party advantage by making more powers for Scotland appear conditional on a particular change for England. Pathetic, wrong, desperate nonsense. And thank goodness there are Scottish Liberal Democrats in the government guaranteeing this new home rule for Scotland. I was privileged to play a major part in the campaign. By virtue of that privilege, I also feel a huge sense of responsibility. For me, this is personal. So let me make one thing clear, beyond any shadow of doubt. Irrespective of any issues in other parts of the United Kingdom, new powers for Scotland will be delivered. And it must be a radical package that puts Scotland's relationship with the rest of the UK on a federal basis. Not just devolving power to Edinburgh, but devolving power from Edinburgh to the communities and peoples of Scotland. We must use this opportunity not just to decentralise power in the rest of the UK, but to reverse the flood tide of centralisation that the SNP has imposed on Scotland over the last 7 years. Now, this is not the first time that we Liberal Democrats have helped save our country. It's been a momentous 4 years. We gave Britain a strong, stable government when it was needed most. We've rescued the British economy. We've kept the UK together 3 times, pulling our country back from the brink. Not bad for our first spelling government for 70 years. Now let's turn to the economy. Yes, friends, I'm not going to forget to talk about the economy. Isn't it telling that the one thing anyone remembers about the Labour Party conference is something Ed Miliband forgot? If the trauma, the great financial trauma of 2008 has taught us anything, it is that a strong economy is a fundamental requirement for any society that aspires to freedom and to fairness. When an economy fails, when a nation's finances spiral out of control, it hurts people. That's why we care so much about the economy. Every aspiration we have for our public services, for the living standards of our citizens, every aspiration we have to be a nation that provides opportunity for everyone depends on fixing our economy. So Labour, take note. You might forget to talk about the economy, but be sure of one thing: the British people won't forget the state it was in when you left office. Confidence was shattered. The deficit the highest in peacetime, the very foundations of the economy crumbling. Now, there is still a lot more to be done to fully repair the economy. But we've made progress. Solid growth for 6 quarters when Labour said it wouldn't happen. 1.8 million new jobs created when Labour said it couldn't happen. Britain now the best place in the world to invest and grow a business. The deficit on course to be halved. And then there's what we've done on income tax for working people. We've cut it. We have, and cut it dramatically. By raising the personal income tax allowance to £10,500, over 27 million working people have had their income tax cut. Millions of basic rate taxpayers now paying £700 less income tax every year, which will rise to £800 by April next year. The Tories may shamelessly try to claim credit for our tax cuts, but Mr. Cameron, voters won't forget that you stared down the TV camera and told them it couldn't be done. And the working poor, who you intend to hit again and again and again in the next Parliament, simply won't fall for it. Tax cuts for working people are only happening because we Liberal Democrats, Nick Clegg and myself, fought for it every day in coalition, and the income tax threshold will only go up to £12,500 and be paid for fairly if there are Lib Dems in government next time to make it happen. Now, in fact, the Tories like to try and claim credit for lots of our achievements, including the economic recovery. Now, as readers of today's Sun newspaper may have noticed, I'm a bit disgruntled about that. So we have to set the record straight. Just like I wrote this speech, we wrote the recovery plan. Just look at its main elements. Cutting taxes for working people, not a Conservative idea, a Liberal Democrat idea. A dramatic increase in apprenticeships, not a Conservative idea, a Liberal Democrat idea. Investing in infrastructure, including pushing for upgrades to our great arterial routes like the A1 and the A303, not a Conservative idea, a Liberal Democrat idea. Record investment in renewable energy, not a Conservative idea, a Liberal Democrat idea. Balancing the books and doing so fairly. You ever hear about that from the Tories? No. Absolutely core Lib Dem thinking this recovery wouldn't be happening without Liberal Democrats in the government. But despite all of the progress that we've made on the economy, the deficit is still too high. We have to be frank with the British people. More tough decisions will be needed to balance the books. So I want to be clear with you today about what that really means. The decisions that I've made in my time as Chief Secretary will, by April 2016, have resulted in £126 billion of measures to cut the deficit, £101 billion of which is spending. So to those who doubt our economic credibility, I say, no Chief Secretary has ever done that before. And I say with all my heart, I hope none is ever put in the position of having to do it again. But with the economic tide running against us, this has not been enough. To meet our goal to eliminate the deficit by April 2018 will require tens of billions of pounds more in spending cuts and tax rises. That's the scale of the biggest challenge the next government will face. But I also want to say with candour to Mr. Osborne, the books cannot be balanced without the wealthiest being asked to do their bit through the tax system, not if Liberal Democrats are involved. The Tories seem to reject the notion that the pain should be shared fairly in the next Parliament, as we have ensured that it has been in this one. Heartless, soulless, and let's be clear what it means. Left unchecked, the Tories will be taking the axe to your local school, to the support that many hard-working people need to make ends meet. We won't sign up to a plan that says the only people who should pay to balance the books are the working poor. Not now, not ever. But we will put in place strict new fiscal rules to ensure that the job of deficit reduction is finished on time, but finished fairly. Labour want to delay dealing with the deficit, but their never-never plans mean more cuts over more years, a slow, relentless grind of perpetual austerity. The Tories want to keep on cutting after the books are balanced. The only thing they have in common is that neither of their sums add up. Neither adds up to a plan that is right for Britain. We will borrow less than Labour, cut less than the Tories. Our approach is balanced. We will eliminate the deficit by April 2018 as planned. Once that is done, the UK, of course, will still have a heavy burden of debt accumulated over the last decade. And it would be totally wrong as Liberals to leave those debts to be paid by our children and our grandchildren. So our first fiscal rule will be to get the nation's debt as a share of GDP down to sustainable levels by the mid-2020s. That will require an ongoing fiscal effort, so there's going to be no spending spree once the deficit is dealt with. But unlike the Conservatives, we Liberal Democrats want the state to be able to invest in economic infrastructure and high-quality public services. So our second fiscal rule will require a balanced budget, but allow for additional investment in productive economic infrastructure, roads, railways, broadband, housing, as long as the overall debt is falling as a share of the economy. And having listened to the Tory party conference, today I want to propose a new third fiscal rule that I hope that we will put in place, a fairness rule. Twice a year, the Treasury has published an analysis that shows how much each income group is contributing to deficit reduction. I insisted on it. And every time it's shown the same thing. Everyone is doing their bit, but the best off have contributed the biggest share of their income to help pay down the deficit. Rightly so. So our third fiscal rule will require that to be the case until the deficit is gone. Fairness will be at the heart of the economic policy of any government that we are part of in the next Parliament. We will balance the budget as planned, do it fairly, and then allow public spending to grow as the economy grows. With pensions and healthcare costs rising and debt to be reduced, the belt will need to stay tight. But we will be able to ensure the NHS has the funds it needs through the next Parliament, which we'll be debating later. The difference is clear. Labour will borrow too much, the Tories will cut too much, Labour will risk the economy, the Tories will sacrifice working people to protect the better off. Our approach is balanced, sensible, and fair. And yes, it does mean asking the wealthiest to pay a little more in tax. So we will introduce a new levy on the highest value properties, new bans on top of council tax, to end the outrage that a £50 million property can currently pay the same in council tax as a £500,000 home. This new tax will be fair, affordable, and will generate funds that will help our nation to live within its means. And Liberal Democrats have also led the crackdown on tax avoidance. The investment I announced at this conference in 2010 is now bringing in an extra £7 billion a year. We are insisting that tax dodgers pay the right tax up front. They only get any money if their scheme is later proved in the courts to work. And we're using psychologists and behavioural economists in HMRC to get the money quickly. Tax dodgers beware. We know where you live, we know how much you owe, and now we know how you think. Your behaviour is unacceptable, and we are coming for our money. And the same goes for multinational companies. For many, many years, a small minority have flitted between tax havens, paying little or nothing anywhere. Those days are coming to an end. Our government has led the way in a global movement to rewrite the tax rules, and that work is nearing completion. And I can tell you, Britain will be one of the first countries to put the new rules into action. This December, we will take the first steps, with new rules to stop firms lending money across borders just to minimize tax. I don't suppose anyone here has ever heard of hybrid mismatches. Well, I thought not. The good news is we're stopping them, so you don't need to know what they are. But you do need to know that this could yield hundreds of millions of pounds, and it will put Britain in the lead with the first of many steps to implement these new global tax rules. Liberal Democrats, we will ensure everyone, however big, pays their fair share. Now, you remember Liam Byrne's infamous letter that David Laws found on the Chief Secretary's desk? There's no money left. Now, I have no intention of going anywhere, but I've started drafting my letter anyway. It says, growth up, borrowing down, fairly. More jobs, less red ink, income tax cuts. That's the Lib Dem legacy. Don't mess it up. But I also need to be clear. The entire deficit cannot be removed through taxes on the wealthy. Far from it. Departmental spending will see further reductions, and we will have to keep social security bills under control too. We've proposed, for example, stopping winter fuel payments to the wealthiest pensioners. In finding savings, people expect us to look first for waste and bad practice in Whitehall. And to be honest, when I started in the Treasury, I pushed this hard, but I was sceptical about how much would be found. But in fact, we've found an additional £5 billion of savings each and every year. These reforms, of course, are far from painless, but they are not at the expense of frontline services. And the experts who we've brought into Whitehall have told us that we can do more. So I can tell you that I've asked the Cabinet Office to start work now on plans to deliver a further £10 billion of savings in this way. Plans that will be ready for the next government and which will help us to balance the books and do so fairly. Now, fellow Liberal Democrats, we are living through momentous times. We are shaping those times, shaping our country so that power is given back here in Scotland and across the UK, shaping our economy so it is stronger and greener, shaping our society so that it is fairer. Be inspired by what our party has achieved in these 4 short years. We've rescued the economy, given opportunity to young people, cut taxes for millions of working people, and this message needs to be heard in every community, on every doorstep. Don't be shy about it. Remind people of this. The crash in 2008 was the product of the old two-party system. For decades, Labour always borrowed too much. For decades, the Tories always cut too much, like two drunks fighting over the wheel of the car. The lurches between one single-party administration and another got bigger and bigger until they crashed it completely. And then tell them this. It isn't one party putting this right. Liberal Democrats are at the heart of this administration. Many would say we are the heart of this administration. It's because we are in government that we have an economic recovery. It's because we are in government that the recovery will be sustainable and that the repair job will be done fairly. We have rescued the country, and we need to summon up all of our courage and resourcefulness to save it again from a Labour Party that would borrow too much and a Tory party that would cut too much. We've brought the country so far in these last 4 years, we cannot let them wreck it with another lurch to left or right. So roll up your sleeves and go tell our story. Go fight for every vote, for a strong economy, a fair society, a Britain where everyone has the opportunity to make the best of their lives. Let's make it happen. Thank you very much.